Hey folks, Captain Mike here from Salty Cape, and today I'm off Monomoy. The forecast underestimated the wind. I don't know how it looks on camera, but it is pretty breezy and pretty rocking and rolling. The incoming tide is still developing, so it's not honking yet. There's not a lot of water moving. So what I'm doing now is just sort of reconning the area, getting the lay of the land. There's lots of birds, lots of bait. Just trying to pay attention to how it's all setting up here. So I refer to Monomoy as Monomoy, but technically there's a number of different name shoals. You have Stone Horse, Round Shoal, Little Round Shoal, Versus Shoal, just to name a couple. But Monomoy, when I talk about Monomoy, I could be talking about any one of those little spots, but they're stretched out over, again, a few miles. But what's awesome about Monomoy, in addition to the confluence of warm and cold water, is all the different bait that it can hold sort of as a result. Sand eels, herring, today we had squid. There's great striper fishing here, but there's also great bottom fishing here. It's a great area for sea bass and fluke. Just a really fishy area. Cool thing is, with all these different structures and techniques you can employ, if you have a collection of lures and techniques under your belt, chances are you can crack the code. Monomoy is a great spot, fishy spot, certainly a beloved spot of mine. So the approach today is casting a rip, and by doing so, we're gonna stem the tide and fish the swing. Now that's the approach. So by stemming the tide, you can see there's current moving the water this way, going over a shoal and creating that turbulence. That turbulence in turn is gonna disorient the squid that are getting swept down the tide, and as they get tossed in that commotion, they're vulnerable to the stripers. They're laying an ambush in the rip. So by fishing the swing, what we're gonna do is position the boat, engine assisted, the engine's just in gear. You can do this with a spot lock trolling motor. I've been using the engines for 30 years and that works fine for me. So I'm just in gear with enough forward motion to keep me in position in front of this rip. Now, fishing the swing is what you're gonna wanna do. To accomplish that, you wanna cast up tide into the smooth water. You want to gauge your reel, get control of your line quickly, and then just work the bait as it sweeps down into the rip. Now we're fishing the surface eraser, and so the technique, and by technique I'm really talking about the retrieve. The thing about the surface eraser is it's a plug, very clearly a plug, designed for long casts, but it's also designed to fish just like a soft bait. So you have all the pluses of a plug or a jig for casting distance. In the swimming action, you have many of the advantages of a soft bait. And so that means there's a whole multitude of different retrieves you can fish with this lure, but I'm just gonna use the twitch, twitch, pause, pause, twitch, twitch, pause, pause, let it sit, dead drift it for a bit, twitch it, pause it. Oh, it's chasing it on the surface. That was on the dead drift, right there. That's a dead drift, right there. You come back. And we're gonna let this guy go and get another one. Oh, just shot out of my hand. First cast of the day, hooked up. Let's do it again. So we've had fish all morning long at the rips here off Monomoy. And one cool thing about Monomoy is all the rips. There's a whole series of riffs and troughs in between them. And the great thing about that is the fish can scatter from the rips and the boats can distribute from the rips. And if you find yourself in a rip with too many boats, you can almost always find a section of rip where it's less crowded. But one little tip, so like I said, we've been here all morning, and so as the tide increases, that is into the peak, and as it subsides, the current I should say, and when the current starts to teeter out, I noticed that you want to keep hopping further down the rips in the direction of the current. So as the tide builds and subsides over the morning, you might find that you have to slide back from one rip to the next, to the next, to the next, to keep peak fishing action. And today was no different. We started on the first rip at Versus Shoal, and then the second rip, and then here we are. And we had good fishing all morning. Yeah, sure, there's probably fish on all the rips, but the peak fishing, that's a good tip, is to follow the rips down with the tide if you notice the bite is starting to taper off. So I'd like to talk about repositioning on a rip. Now, we just finished our drift on this rip where that boat behind me is located now. And what's happening is you start at the, I'm gonna call it the top of the rip. The way the tide and the current works, you sort of like get sucked down to the other end. So I'm repositioning, I'm coming back to where I started. And you'll notice that I'm at least 100 yards in front of the rip. 100 yards, a football field's length, is a good frame of reference in how far you want to be in front of the rip if you're going to move. Obviously, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but not in the case of a rip, because if you just go up the rip along the edge, you're going to spook some fish and perhaps disrupt some other anglers fishing. So a great rule of thumb is to come out 100 yards, motor up, and then re-enter the rip in a very slow, deliberate manner. Again, not to spook other boats. Now, the final thing I'd like to say about repositioning in a rip is you don't want to stop too close to another boat. And again, the rule of thumb is if you cast and have to stop your lure before it could hit the boat, you're too close. This guy might be the biggest one of the day. I'm gonna estimate mid 30-inch range on this one, maybe 35. Now, we've taken a lot of fish out of the water to get measurements for the Mass DMF Citizen Science Project, and we're gonna do that with this fish as well. But generally speaking, if you can de-hook a striper while it's still in the water, that is the best spot to de-hook and release a fish. We're gonna take this fish out of the water to get length measurements so we can log this for the Mass DMF Striped Bass Citizen Science Project via the Gauntlet app. Now, when I take this fish out of the water, I wanna support the fish by its belly. I don't wanna just lift it out by its jaw, because as these fish get bigger, this fish is low to mid 30-inch range. So when I pick it up, I want to support the weight on the belly so I'm not just hanging him by, or her, I should say, by the jaw. And that way I can support the fish, measure it on a wet surface, get this fish back in the water as quickly as possible. There it goes. That was ready to rock and roll. June on Monomoy, pretty darn good. So it's just myself at the helm with the rod and George on the camera. And I just have one little tip I want to share on casting. Now, my biggest pet peeve as a captain is anytime someone casts a lure over the boat. I always like lures outboard of the boat. Now, I'm righty, so I want to cast over my right-hand shoulder. Now, I can still kind of sort of cast righty, but of a lefty persuasion. And so the lefty would cast over left shoulder and off the port side of a boat, bow to stemming the tide in a rip. The lefty has the advantage in the stern, and the righty has the advantage in the bow. Again, if your goal is to keep the lure outboard of the boat. But what I like to do is what's called the lacrosse cast. So I'm set up right here as if I'm gonna cast righty. All I do is roll my hands over like this, and then I come back just like I would in a cast and let it rock. I have the same distance and accuracy as if I was casting righty, but all I'm doing is rolling my hands over and going backwards. That way you don't hit a T-top, rods in a rod holder, rods in a T-top, another angler, God forbid, hook somebody. But again, that lacrosse cast is a very handy little thing to teach guests on your boat. And I like the phraseology of lacrosse because that comes naturally to the lacrosse anglers. But again, just fold it over, let it go. So here are the outfits we were using. I'm just gonna walk you through these from stem to stern, so to speak. And so we'll start with the rod. We're using the Hogan System Inshore medium power rods. In my opinion, this is about as light tackle as I go. They are very light tackle, very parabolic action rods. As you can see from the fishing video today, the rods just have a really nice bend to them. They're a moderate fast action, so you do have a little tip flex, which helps with casting control on lighter lures and quick power on a initial hook set. But overall, their secondary action is very moderate and parabolic, so they're a delight to fish with. Now, today was really rocking and rolling. Having a softer rod like these Inshore rods are, the boat's rocking and rolling. It's very forgiving if you have an inexperienced angler on the boat, or even an experienced angler like myself with it being rough. But if you move whatever, the rod's gonna bend or de-bend to accommodate the boat rocking, but it's gonna be less inclined to present slack into the line while fighting the fish. Now, these rods, in my opinion, balance perfectly on a 4,000 class reel. These happen to be Daiwa Saltist. I have these reels loaded with 20-pound test braid and 20-pound test fluorocarbon leaders today. Now, the lures we're using are the Hogan Surface Erasers. So here are the two very surface erasers we used all morning. We didn't lose a single lure. Now, we knew the stripers were keyed in on squid, so I call these my squidish colors. Now, to me, amber, the translucent amber, is the most squid-like of any color. That's sort of the color they are when they're naturally swimming in the water. But they do have hues of pink in them, so I also like to carry pink lures when squid are around, particularly when the tide subsides and it slacks and it's, the fish are sort of spread out or a little lazier. I like to have an attractor color in the mix. And so pink makes a great attractor color when there's squid in the area, because it is on the squid spectrum. Now, these are small and relatively light to their mass. So when you can twitch them, you can dead stick them, dead drift them, make them come alive, fish them fast, fish them slow, all the same ways you would fish an unweighted soft bait, which makes these lures perhaps the most practical lure that I have in my tackle box to put on first. When we're rip fishing like today on striped bass keyed in on small squid, all you need to do is twitch these and make them come alive in the rip, and you'll have bent rods all day. Well, the goal today was to catch a bunch of fish and get home before the afternoon wind. I think mission accomplished, except for the fact I'm gonna take one last cast and hopefully end the hot day on a nice fish. It's a good fish. Now that's the way to go out.